One of my favorite photographs of all time is one of George Lucas surrounded by a whole bunch of models from all three of the original films. It's the perfect personification of every writer's dream, to take what is inside our heads and bring them into reality. George said that he wished he could plug something into his brain so he could project it onto the screen. This was what George Lucas set out to do from the beginning, and this image perfectly captures the realization of that desire. The Empire Strikes Back was received with a certain degree of skepticism. Most audiences loved it. It made more than $400 million in its first year. It won 4 Academy Awards and the People's Choice Award for Best Film. But some critics continued to criticize it for still being too lighthearted, while others criticized it for being too dark. Audiences were often confused by its lack of a conclusive ending. These were the days after the serials and before streaming, so they weren't used to it. But most audiences weren't certain about its serious tone. Sound familiar? But ultimately, people were excited to see what the next installment would be. Lucas, meanwhile, now had the studio he had wanted to build with Coppola in Central California, but his friend had moved on, giving in to Hollywood and working within the system. His films since their partnership, the Godfather movies, The Conversation, and Apocalypse Now, had all been successes, so he was continuing on with his own films, including his new experimental film done much like a stage play musical, One from the Heart. George was now working with a friend he had become closer to, Steven Spielberg, on a film they had discussed in Hawaii while the original Star Wars was releasing, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Lucasfilm also began to fulfill the original dreams of American Zoetrope by helping set up, produce, and distribute other films. It helped release one of Akira Kurosawa's films internationally, and produced the movie Twice Upon a Time for HBO, which used innovative new techniques of animation. Skywalker Sound had developed the THX sound system, and Lucasfilm also began to develop the technologies that would later become Pixar and Photoshop. Now that he had the power to get films made, George wanted to help develop new voices in cinema, as well as support others in getting their projects made and spread. But he still had his own series to finish. In early years, he had envisioned a 9-film arc, showing the rise and fall of an empire, and Anakin's rise and fall along with it. But doing all of them, at least in the foreseeable future, seemed to be overly ambitious. It's very telling of how much potential there is in the Star Wars universe that both Lucas and Gilroy wound up having the same problem of initially trying to do too much and having to scale back. He focused on one conclusive movie, a film he first called Revenge of the Jedi, but changed to Return of the Jedi because revenge was the wrong word for what a Jedi would do. But even with that, he had to scale back his ambitions. Empire had set up multiple storylines, such as Han's rescue, Luke confronting Obi-Wan and Yoda about his father, and the rebellion needing to regroup and strike back at the Empire. And he wanted a climax with massive battles across multiple worlds. He knew, though, that this was all a little too much, even for him. So the battles got squeezed into one, and each of the storylines were going to have to fit into small sections, sometimes little more than single scenes. It was a difficult task, but he trusted Lawrence Kasdan, who had written both Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's hard to say exactly how much of what was written came from one man or the other, but we know that the overall ideas came from Lucas, and Kasdan wanted either Luke to turn to the dark side, or a main character to die, which is a little confusing because he also convinced Harrison Ford to come back, which would have been the obvious choice for a death if they were going to kill someone off. Anyway, George Lucas also wanted Steven Spielberg to direct the film, which was a perfect match. His clashes with the Directors Guild put a stop to it. The reasons behind this really reveal a dark side of the Hollywood unions. The primary dispute came from their rules, which stipulated that the director's name needs to appear before the opening credits of the film, and the director's name must also appear before the producer. So what they demanded of him was this. Even allowing the Lucasfilm logo to appear at the beginning was forbidden. Rules like this are there only for ego. It doesn't actually protect anyone, and Lucas rightfully pushed back against such narrow-mindedness. Unions are supposed to protect their members from abuse and get them fair pay, which is obviously an important thing. And to be fair, Hollywood unions do that in many ways, but they are notorious for interference in ways that help no one, obstruct artistic choices, and feed on ego. In their case against George Lucas, they wanted to block the release of The Empire Strikes Back just because he wanted to have the opening we all know and love. and he had to pay them $250,000 just so they wouldn't kick Irvin Kershner out of the union. Lucas was so disgusted, he quit the union himself. Anyway, Lucas turned to another up-and-coming filmmaker who was independent of the studios and unions, David Lynch. Yes, that David Lynch. And no, it wasn't because he had a different view of Lynch's work. He had been impressed with Eraserhead and The Elephant Man. To understand this, remember that Lucas came from that same type of avant-garde filmmaking, and Lynch's style appealed to him. But Lucas's style did not appeal to Lynch, so he turned it down, taking instead the movie Dune the following year. So at last Lucas offered the job to Richard Marquand, who was an English director, again, free of the BS of the DGA. He was also much like Irvin Kershner, a filmmaker who was concerned with characters and interpersonal relationships. When it came close to release, the anticipation was palpable. One could only compare it today to the conclusion of an extremely popular series which has been running for several years, like Game of Thrones, except not sucking quite so bad. It was thrilling to watch as a kid, and again, we all went many times and watched it over and over on home video. However, even as a child, there were some things that nagged at me, and as I grew up and studied film and storytelling, I grew more and more disappointed by them. Well, let's take a look. When it first tilts down to the second Death Star, the visual is amazing. This is the best looking of the 3 original films, and the effects are gorgeous. And once again, begins with a Star Destroyer, out of which comes a new ship. It's one thing about bringing new elements into a series. It helps expand the universe, makes it feel bigger and more thorough. As for the Death Star, I was actually very disappointed by this for a long time. It was a pity to repeat the same device again that has to also be blown up. I felt that it should have been something more definitive, like Palpatine's seat of power or something. But recently I've been reminded of this scene from the original.
Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station.
It explains everything you need to know about the Death Star program. Without a Senate to manipulate, the Emperor has to maintain control over the planets. The threat to destroying them is that control, so his power is part and parcel with the Death Star. This really implies that the Empire hasn't been able to retain as much power since the end of A New Hope, and this is how he plans to lock it back down. So okay, I think it would have helped to have something in this which emphasizes that idea to provide a little more tension, but it works okay. And it looks cool as hell. Also, by the way, notice what this little scene has done. It establishes the procedure a shuttle needs to follow in order to pass by the shield. Information we will need later when the main characters are trying to sneak by. There's something about the music here that I can't put my finger on, a conclusiveness to open the final chapter. I don't know how to describe it, but it's a style used in some final movies or seasons that perfectly build the tension to take us into the climax. And while we're on the subject of the music, it's one of the best choices of this entire trilogy, to use orchestral music rather than pop music of the time. Studios often require pop music in films for the short-sighted reason of selling the soundtrack, and it dates them terribly. Star Wars will remain timeless because of the John Williams score. Imagine Star Wars with disco music. One last thing to say about this scene. Notice the angles used. The camera moves with Vader, giving him the power in the scene, and it's at the same level as the officer, but looking up to Vader when he speaks. The only time we look down to him is when he leaves the officer, who looks small and weak in the frame. An excellent way to show the power dynamics. And, of course, there's this implied threat which is a callback to Empire.
The Emperor is not as forgiving as I am.
Then we go to Tatooine, and this is where I started to get disappointed. This planet was supposed to be...
If there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from.
And now, 2/3 of the series happens here. Most of all, though, it weakens Jabba. In the original, when Greedo found Han, because Tatooine was an obscure world in the middle of nowhere, it felt like Jabba's reach was infinite. Now we learn that, oh, he was just around the corner, so it was no big deal to find Han. The palace itself, with all the various creatures and the different languages, is fantastic. It's got a completely different feel from the Empire and the Rebellion, and everything is designed to feel foreign. Very few humans. The architecture and decor is designed to look different from what we're used to. The lighting is spotty, and the background sounds are often unsettling. What I don't like, though, is the way the story unfolds. Empire ended with a setup for something far more interesting. Lando and Chewie were going to track down the bounty hunter, which implies that Boba Fett did not go directly to Jabba. This could have been a thrilling chase, one where we see more of the galaxy, where we get to see Lando and Chewie hunting Boba, then Boba in action as he turns the tide on them and captures one or both of them. You could then have the others go in one by one, failing in their attempts until we wind up in the same spot they are at the end of the first section. As it is here, there is instead this convoluted plan that doesn't make a lot of sense, and borders on retconning the end of Empire. Luke's entrance is epic. We've seen him slowly learn these powers over the first couple movies, and now he's ready to use them. And he's grown so powerful that he doesn't have to show it off. He's calm, in charge, and his only match is Jabba, who is equally calm and in charge. In fact, Jabba's entire aura is all about not needing to move from his spot to control his empire. The person to be feared most is the one who doesn't need to get off his couch to kick your ass. Then there's Leia's bikini outfit, and I'm torn about it. First off, I'll admit it, I am a heterosexual man, so I'm not going to deny the obvious appeal. Also, I was 12 at the time this movie was released, and I'll neither confirm nor deny the number of times I paused certain moments of this opening act. But is it really right? Just as Luke is coming into his own as a Jedi in this film, Leia should be coming into her own as a leader, but instead they put her into a BDSM outfit. I mean, it does fit the story, but I'm not convinced it was the right story to tell. I'd love to hear what you all think about this aspect, especially the women who are watching. Also, by the way, I wonder if Carrie Fisher knew they were going to pull her neck at this point. Look at her face! One of the important elements of the Rancor Pit is the death of this Gamorrean. It's an important tool to put a minion into a position with a hero so you can get an example of what will happen to the hero if he fails. And then there's the Rancor's handler, which is a nice touch. There's also a neat fan fiction done about him I'd like to recommend. Actually makes the scene genuinely a little sad. When they're at the execution, there is an example of good directing and editing. As they got to this point, we saw everyone individually moving around. Now we have a moment where we see the position of each one, emphasized by the horn section of the music. Then the battle. This has all been the same kind of setup as they had in Empire, a mini-story that fits within the larger one to reintroduce the characters. It serves a unique purpose to both wrap up a storyline while starting another. And it ends 40 minutes into the film, again, giving the first act time to breathe. As we go back to the Death Star, we see another reason why we saw Vader's entrance, to compare it to this. He had what seemed to be the large honor guard to welcome him, but now there's a veritable parade outside, and a huge gathering to meet him. The size of this throng is emphasized by their variety, and even the reflective floor, which makes it look like there are even more of them. And finally, most importantly, Vader, who has been presented with extreme power through all the movies, bows to him. This build-up has been earned through all the movies, but made even more palpable when the Endor series is added. We started with local police, then expanded into the Empire, where we heard only slight references to the Emperor. The series kept growing in scale, introducing us next to the Senate, where the Emperor was far more on people's lips. Then we go up in rank of the ISB, where the Emperor's presence is used as a threat. And finally, Mon Mothma points out that he is the true beast behind everything. The movies get us closer and closer to his creations, and we've seen the war through the eyes of his right-hand man. And now, finally, the man himself walks toward us, but he's still shrouded through the mist of his hood. Even as we hear him speak, we see only his lips and nose. Our only good views are mostly in shade. We then cut to his light side equivalent, Yoda, which is a good idea, but I hate the way this is handled. Empire Strikes Back left us with a burning conundrum. Both of Luke's mentors had lied to him about his father. Why? What were they hiding? How good could the light side be if it relies on deceit? Furthermore, Luke didn't finish his training. How did he get so good with his skills, and with the lightsaber, without further training? And no, expanded universe stuff does not count. It's either in the movie, or it doesn't exist. All these elements that were in Empire could be the setup of something very interesting, where Luke began figuring things out for himself, and perhaps tapped into a form of the Force neither side had come up with. He could start doing things neither Palpatine nor Yoda expect. Most importantly though, this should be the most emotionally intense part of the movie, Luke's confrontation with Yoda and Ben. Instead, we find Yoda being passive-aggressive and Ben gaslighting Luke. Both of them tell Luke to confront Vader, the very thing they were telling him not to do in the last film. And as far as we've seen, nothing has changed between them in the interim. All these two know is that Luke failed when he faced him the first time. And what do they expect him to do? Confront Vader. What does that mean exactly? Kill him? Bring him to the light? This entire interaction should have been a reaction to what Luke learned, and them trying to explain their reasons. And I don't expect it to be his last meeting with them. Have Luke leave angry, begin to feel a pull toward the dark side, realize it's not the right thing to do, then talk to them again as he treads a new path. Maybe he sees their Force ghost somewhere else, or maybe he returns to Dagobah, or maybe Yoda goes to the rebellion. There are a lot of ways it could have been done, but this whole Yoda avoiding the question as he dies and BS from Ben saying a certain point of view is not a good way to do it, and might be the most disappointing aspect of this entire movie. Or maybe this is.
Leia's my sister.
God damn, I can't tell you how stupid I think this is. Having Leia be Luke's sister adds absolutely nothing to the story while causing a whole host of problems. It only makes the coincidences so big as to be comical. I mean, it's enough to make Gilbert and Sullivan blush. Plus, of course, there's this. It also further makes Luke's journey decided for him rather than something he chose. The only way it's even used in this story is when Vader uses it to goad Luke into coming out of hiding, which could have been done in so many other ways. She didn't need to be his twin friggin' sister for him to care about her, or any of the others, causing Luke to lose his temper. By the way, quick side note, I've always thought when Luke shouts here, it sounds like he's shouting, "Nerd!" Imagine calling the Lord of Darkness nerd. Anyway, this whole segment would be the worst part of the movie if it wasn't for the next scene. I mean, it is cool to see the Rebel fleet. The briefing room looks great, their hologram is awesome, and they lay out the stakes and the method for the rest of the movie. Plus we get to see Mon Mothma one last time. But the way they reveal who will be in command is so mind-numbingly stupid, it gives me a headache. First they make Lando a general in charge of the squadrons. Lando, the guy who betrayed some of the top rebel operatives. Yeah, he made up for it, but you don't put a new guy who once betrayed your people in charge of the D-Day landings. Oh, but he pulled off a maneuver at a battle. Well then, that still makes no sense. Just because you pulled a maneuver doesn't mean you're going to be a great commander. This is their most important and dangerous attack, and they're putting this guy in charge? And for fuck's sake, he doesn't even have a ship. He winds up having to borrow Han's. There are all these other pilots who have been risking their lives for the rebellion over the years, but they give it to... Okay, I gotta watch my blood pressure here. Let's move on. So in the briefing, they reveal that the entire plan hinges on the success of a strike team on the planet. And who do they get to lead that one? The guy who's been in carbon freeze for a while. The guy who sat out most of the Battle of Yavin. The guy who wasn't even involved in the Battle of Hoth. Seriously, no one in the rebellion was a better choice for their most important mission in their history? And sitting right next to him is Leia Organa, one of the freaking leaders of the rebellion. One of their top commanders. But no, don't give it to her. She's a chick, and this is the 80s. Give it to the dude who's been absent a lot. Instead, have her say,
I wonder who they found to pull that off.
Like she's an edgy teenager in the back of the classroom trying to dodge an assignment by the teacher. Also, they could have a wah, wah, wah moment. And the motherfucker doesn't even have his command team put together. Again, this is the most important mission in the rebellion's history. The galaxy is counting on this. And this moron doesn't even have his command team set? Right then, the general should say, "You're fired, Solo, get out of here." And given the responsibility to someone else. Instead, they have this scene where the main characters join up like it's a fucking Mickey Rooney movie. Let's put on a play. I'll be commander. I'll be the sniper. I'll be the cutthroat. It's just so... Okay, I'm calm. Let's move on before I have a heart attack. God, this is a stupid scene. As they go on the mission, this whole idea of Han being in charge instead of Leia just keeps proving to be ridiculous. But on the Imperial side, I love that we keep getting more types of troops revealed. It makes perfect sense that you would have a different kind of trooper who goes out on scouting missions, and it would have lighter armor. It makes for a more believable and dynamic galaxy, and it sets up the best chase scene in the series. I mean, just look at this. And it's an interesting choice that they went without music. They just trusted that the sounds would be enough, especially in the way they echo through the woods.
Move closer!
After the chase, Han and Luke find the remains of Leia's crash. I'm purposely skipping the scene where she meets Wicket, which is actually quite a good scene, but I think it would have been interesting if they had shown this first and let the audience wonder what happened to her, revealing her meeting Wicket later. It would have provided some much-needed tension. Instead, we're not really that worried about her, and it seems like the characters aren't either. Han just says,
I hope she's all right.
This is the love of his life, and all he has to say is, I hope she's all right. Then we move right along to the next thing. The music even gets frivolous. In fact, that becomes the problem with the entire next section of the movie. A lot of people have criticized the Ewoks over the decades, saying they're too childish, even claiming they ruined the movie. A lot of people thought they should have been Wookiees. I've given my fair share of these criticisms as well, but in thinking of it over time, I've come to realize that they aren't really the problem. In fact, they needed to be small, unassuming, and most of all, harmless. If they were anything more than that, the Emperor would have considered them a threat, and the whole point is that they are the factor the Emperor didn't take into account, which turns the tide in favor of the rebellion. So yes, the cuddly teddy bears were necessary to this movie. However, we're in the middle of the film, and even though I have problems with screenplay formulas, there are certain truths to storytelling, and one of them is that you need to have some form of tension in the middle. For perspective, at this same point in A New Hope, the Falcon was being pulled into the Death Star, and in The Empire Strikes Back, Luke was facing off with the visions of his father. Here you've got cuddly creatures and cute gags. And it's unfortunate because the tension could be there. These are creatures who are hostile to the main characters when they meet them. They take them against their will. They tie them up. They even try to cook Han. This moment should be terrifying. Instead, it's all the cheery music with constant jokes. We're meant to laugh at all of this. And therein lies the problem. It slows the whole thing down. The most of a protest they get is when Leia comes out and just goes,
But these are my friends.
and when they don't, oh well. They're about to murder the man she loves and serve him to her. And she's like, well, I tried. It's a long way from to
3PO, tell them they must be set free.
This should have been the time when they were establishing the ferocity of the Ewoks. Show them overcome everyone, including Chewbacca. That would make it all the more believable when they overcame the stormtroopers later on, thus getting two birds with one stone. Although I will say that I like C-3PO's telling the story to the Ewoks. It's a good way to sort of recap before we head into the final act of the series. It's followed up by the continuation of that dumbass subplot of the twins, with some of the most awkward dialogue of the film.
You have a power I don't understand and could never have.
My sister has it. It's you, Leia.
I know. Somehow, I've always known.
Throughout the movie, you have these moments that even as a kid I thought were pretty immature.
It's the last mistake you'll ever make.
It's so bizarre that it was the same screenwriter who wrote Empire and Raiders. I can't help but wonder how much interference there was from George. But for now, we're going into the climax. The battle for Endor is nearly perfect. Industrial light and magic was at its peak, and the intercutting of land, space, and throne room keep it engaging. They established the space battles in movie 1, then the land battles in movie 2, had a lightsaber fight in each, with the stakes raising every time. And now, all three come together in one big climax with music that perfectly ties them together. In the space battle, it's easy to think it's all about the improvement to the special effects, but an overlooked and very important aspect is framing and movement. In the Star Wars prequels, you had even better special effects and more ships, which would be logical in a galactic battle, but the framing was often muddled. In Return of the Jedi, even with everything moving, there is a clear balance to the frame, providing a focus to the scene and filling the rest with supporting elements. Here are some examples. The ground battle is ironically a little more chaotic, but it's part of the point of that fight. Enemies are appearing from everywhere, popping suddenly out of bushes, vanishing behind trees, etc. But our main characters are placed in a doorway so we can focus on their part of the fight. They also make clear mistakes at the beginning, but we see how they rally and come back. The only problems I have with this battle is, on the ground, the stormtrooper armor once again doesn't do anything. It's always been a little annoying that it doesn't seem to affect blaster fire, But to not even deflect arrows or gentle taps on the head, it's a bit too much. And I know they couldn't show their heads being bashed in, but they could have had moments where they were pulled down and we hear blood-curdling scream while the bushes shake, or something like that. This is where Spielberg would have really shined. In space, there are a couple parts that didn't work. One is this moment where you see this A-Wing pilot say something, then on the next shot his ship is clearly destroyed, then it cuts back to him inside the ship. And of course there's the climactic moment with the Superstar Destroyer ramming into the Death Star. It's the one effect that just does not work. Of course, issues like these could have been fixed with the special edition, but George was too busy putting in a musical number. The best of them to me, though, is the lightsaber fight. I was a little disappointed as a kid because I wanted a big climactic duel, like the one in Empire. But this is a fight where one person wants to evade, and the other is holding back a little because he's conflicted. It's natural for a child, or really anyone, to expect a big exciting fight between the main characters. That's what most movies and series do, right? If George Lucas wanted to give the audience what they wanted and expected, he would have given them that. But he did not. He had something to say, something to teach, and he did so through the characters. He didn't give us what we wanted, he gave us what we needed to hear. And I am eternally grateful to him for that. Despite all my other problems with this film, I have to say that I greatly appreciate this one thing. It took courage for Lucas to essentially say, I know you all want this explosive climax, but there's something more important to learn here, so just listen. That's the difference between a film made by a filmmaker and a movie made by a finance committee. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved seeing Luke years later get a chance to use all his powers to smash a bunch of robots. But to end this trilogy with a statement about not falling into the trappings of anger, fear, and aggression was perfection. For me, Luke turning to the Emperor, throwing away his weapon, and saying, I will not give in, has been an inspiration to me beyond any words I could muster. This is one of the greatest influences of my life.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Much of what Lucas was talking about was family, lineage, fatherhood, an issue close to his heart.
What do you want the first line of your obituary to say?
That was a great dad.
And while that is still all there, I think the more important point is less that Luke is sparing his father, and more that he is standing up to the bully who turned him into what he became, who's trying to do the same to Luke.
Your hate has made you powerful.
Standing up to evil, to oppression, is a difficult thing to do. It's especially difficult to do when you're alone and you're facing off against a powerful person. I think that's why Luthen's line has resonated with so many people.
I have friends everywhere.
No matter how powerful the enemy, no matter how much the odds seem stacked against us, tyranny must be stood up to, unflinchingly and without hesitation. But it's made easier when we know we have friends everywhere. And, as a young man once said,
there will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. The imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Oppression is the mask of fear. The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this. Try.
This moment of Luke standing his ground, alone and facing the most powerful man in the galaxy, him refusing to become what the Emperor wants him to be, perfectly embodies this point. That is ultimately the lesson of Star Wars.
So be it, Jedi.
Return of the Jedi concluded the trilogy with huge box office numbers. Lucasfilm was the most successful independent production company of all time. It went on to develop the latest in special effects, computer graphics, and created the new standard in audio, the THX sound system. They opened a computer gaming section, and started one of the first virtual community networks, Habitat, a precursor to social media. They made the Indiana Jones franchise, Labyrinth, and Willow, and in 1988, Lucas was able to come full circle and produce a movie for his friend Francis Ford Coppola, Tucker, the man in his dream. It was analogous to the way the two men felt about their own relationship to the film industry. The studios were much like the big auto manufacturers in the movie, and Coppola and Lucas were like Tucker, taking them on and refusing to give up. After making the 3 prequel films and producing most of the Clone Wars series, George Lucas decided to sell his independent company to one of the very studios he used to rebel against. Their attempt at the main storyline was a disaster, but they had success on the fringes, with Rogue One, the first 2 seasons of The Mandallorian, the conclusion of the Clone Wars, and of course, Endor. Lucas's protege, Dave Filoni, is finally in charge, and he's developing New Republic stories which are post-Return of the Jedi. Unfortunately, they inevitably need to connect with the sequels, and just as people don't rewatch the first seasons of Game of Thrones because of where that story went, I think these will have the same luck with audiences. As for me, I think I'm at peace just moving on. Next year it will have been 50 years since the beginning of all of this, and that's enough time to have followed something this closely. I feel that I have the full story now. It begins with Endor, goes through Rogue One, and ends with the original trilogy. The Clone Wars serves as a nice appendix, much like Tolkien's appendices for The Lord of the Rings. Something you don't read or watch before the series, but includes a lot of interesting things which lead up to the main storyline. And finally, the first 2 seasons of The Mandallorian serve as a nice epilogue, ending conclusively with this moment. All stories need a good ending. Franchises have forgotten that recently, but they really do. Studios have offered Steven Spielberg millions of dollars to do a sequel to E.T., but he refuses because he recognizes the value of a powerful end, and anything that comes after only serves to damage it. Luke's refusal to kill his father, then rescuing a creature of Yoda's race, is a perfect ending. I do wish Dave Filoni and the others well. I know they've worked hard to get where they are, and I hope people enjoy it. But I've grown indifferent. And anyone who understands love knows that the opposite of it is not hate, it's indifference. The Mandalorian and Grogu is the first Star Wars movie of which I saw none of in the theater. And I didn't miss it. I just truly did not care. And it seems I'm not the only one, as the box office reflected. It got beaten by small, independent films made by YouTubers. And that brings us back around to Coppola and Lucas, and what they were building way back in the early 70s. Their vision was to democratize movies, to make it easier for independent films to be made so that new voices could be heard.
To me, the great hope is that now these little 8mm video recorders and stuff are coming around. Some just people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them, and suddenly one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart, and make a beautiful film with her little father's camera recorder. And for once, the so-called professionalism about movies will be destroyed forever, and it'll really become an art form.
Now that little fat girl is all grown up and has taken the form of many people across many forms on the internet. The art of film is no longer only for the wealthy. That is the vision Lucas and Coppola had, and it's finally here. And it's not restricted to LA or New York or even San Francisco. It's everywhere.
The rebellion isn't here anymore. It's flown away. It's everywhere now.
There was a movie in the early 90s that spoke on this subject called Pump Up the Volume. The idea was that this one teenager explores his feelings through a pirate radio show, and in the process inspires others to speak up. Back then, pirate radio was about the only independent medium to get your voice out there. But now we live in a world with so many options, most of which are legal. And we are lucky to live in such an era. Creators who would never have a chance in earlier decades are now creating massive hits. And we're better off as fans and creators. The independent revolution is here, now, and it's something to be celebrated. So to end this video, and this series, instead of telling you about one of my projects, I'm asking all of you to talk about your projects, your videos, your books, your games. And if you don't have any, or you do and you want to post more, comment with links to other videos and other art. They can be Star Wars fanfic, or they can be about anything else. They can be podcasts, books, blogs, anything independent you want the world to see. Leave the links in the comments, and even more importantly, click on other people's links. Support each other's works and recommendations, and come back to see more as they're put up. The independent revolution is here. It's won. And it's up to us to keep the dream alive.
Hi everybody, this is Amy at 97 FM in Springfield, and my show is Radioactive. Can anyone out there hear me?
Sick of silence, let it out.
This is Ethan from LA, and I'm here to
16,
stop
but I'm
the
not
violence.
sweet. Are you running the streets? Call the real runaway hotline. KCAT Los Gatos, California. This is I Am. Are you?
This is No Protection out
We
from
are
New
the
Jersey.
boys. Hi, you're on the air.
Turn on the truth.